These men disappeared with no trace of survival. No one knows what took them or who took them. They were seen one last time as a group before everything changed for the worst. And they were in deep water. On a coastal morning of February 11th, 1979, these group of five friends named Benjamin, Ralph, Scott, Patrick, and Peter from the town of Hana in Hawaii decided to take the day and go on a fishing trip on a 17-foot large boat called the Sarah Joe that they had all used together regularly. It was mid-morning around 10 a.m. when they all packed up a bag of clothes, some fishing gear, a little bit of food, and nothing much else but the rest of the excitement they had for treading the waters and enjoying the sea together for the day. Undocking and leaving the harbor to calm waters and nice, sunny, beautiful weather. For the next few hours, they really just enjoyed the scenery around them, casting their lines a few miles off of the shore. Around 3 hours had passed, and now around 1 in the afternoon, some freak winds started to show up, coming in from the mountainside that they had left from, enough to be rocking the Sarah Joe back and forth for these men to pull in all of their lines and hunker down to try and save themselves from accidentally falling over into the water. They thought to themselves, hey guys, let's just wait this out. This is gonna pass. It's just a random storm, and after this, we'll continue our fishing trip. We haven't caught anything yet, and we're definitely not gonna let this ruin our day. Peter's father got so worried really quick because as the storm was building and getting thicker and thicker, he noticed that the boat, he lost sight of it. He could not see the boat at all, and they weren't that far out, only a few miles, just enough to get into some deep water fishing, but still close enough that if they needed to, they could just come right back to shore, and since he couldn't see them through the thick of this storm, it meant that it was bad enough that these men were in some serious danger. His father even tried to call in some other locals from the area to help him to see if they could find the boat, to see if anyone could see these men in the storm. But as they were trying to wave them in to say, hey guys, come back in, it's too much, just go fishing another day, none of these locals nor his father could see the Sarah Joe or the men. It was like the storm had just swallowed all of them up whole, just like that. Peter's father then decided to get on another boat all by himself, a smaller one, to just go out there all alone to the middle of this storm to look for these men and the Sarah Joe, to see if it had been pushed away from where it was anchored down, to see if they had moved at all to avoid the storm, any search or sign of them anywhere. He went around in circles for miles looking for any traces of signs that they were even there. He wasn't going delusional, so something must have happened to them. But after hours of trying to look for them, any signs, he went back empty-handed. It got too dark, and it wasn't safe for him out there all alone either. The next morning, Peter's father attempted to go right back out there and continue his search for these men, but this time he took one of his friends, yet another local named John, who was actually a marine biologist and worked right there off of the shore, studying the entire area and the waters locally. He knew it all very well, and with these two together, they were bound to find something. The two of them searched and searched all afternoon, and John, the marine biologist who knew these waters like the back of his hand throughout his career, not even he could see any traces of these men. It got so bad, and too much time, too many days were passing by now, the Coast Guard ended up being called. So the Coast Guard called in another ship and a helicopter to begin an even broader search. 5 days now had gone by, almost an entire week. The Coast Guard, the helicopter, the ship, they had searched an entire 73,000 square miles around where these men were last seen, and nothing. They were so hopeless that they ended up suspending the search until further notice, basically permanent until they might find any sign of life. Eventually, an entire decade passed by. The men, they were never found. Not even the boat was found. And everyone just kind of had to move on with their lives. Until eventually, John, the marine biologist, he was working yet again, going on an expedition 2,000 miles in the opposite direction of Maui, where the men originally went missing in that storm on the Sarah Joe. And he was in the Marshall Islands. And little did he know that this case of the Sarah Joe missing occurrence of these 5 friends, It was about to be blown wide open once again in the most gruesome, horrifying way possible. Along his expedition, John wound up sailing near a deserted island called Tongyi to collect some specimen, but off into the distance as he was approaching the island, he saw some faint sort of object poking out of some reef and buried underneath some sand. It was a portion of a boat. John and his crew then brought their boat to dock at the shore, got out to examine the wreckage, look around, and walk to see if they could find anyone that might need help, if there was anyone in danger that belonged to this boat. But upon first glance, they saw nothing, no signs of life or any signs that it was ever inhabited. It was then that he kept walking and trying to see if anything would pop up and catch his attention when, about 60 yards away, he saw it. It was a grave. It was very makeshift. It looked like someone just sort of got a pile of sticks and some rocks and put them together as in an effort to bury something or someone. He saw some coral rocks stacked up in some sort of formation. He started to then pull away at some of these rocks to see if there was actually something buried underneath this, because he couldn't really believe his eyes. None of he or his crew were expecting to find any of this. So as he was pulling out some of the rocks, he then pulled out something else that completely shocked him. It was a jawbone buried underneath a couple of these rocks. He had no idea where this jawbone came from, if it belonged to the wreckage. None of them knew if the two were even remotely connected to one another. What John did notice was that as he unearthed this jawbone, well, he and his team went back to the boat wreckage to see if there was any clues as to who this belonged to, and as they were looking around it, they did notice some sort of brushed off but still slightly legible numbers. They were registration numbers, and as John got these numbers down, he gave them to his team, and his team then found out that these registration numbers on the boat did in fact lead back to some islands around the Hawaii area. Once John got back to his headquarters and he had started to spread the word around about what he and his team had found on their expedition on that deserted island of the wreckage, the families of the previous 10 years of the 5 men that had gone missing, they thought maybe this is a clue. So they hired a private investigator to go out there with his own team and further investigate what his other expedition team had found. Once Steve, the private investigator, went back out there with his own crew, they continued to further excavate the grave site, and they found another handful of bones that connected to the jawbone that they had originally found on the previous biologist expedition, and they connected the DNA samples of those bones to one of the 5 members of those original men that went out on the Sarah Joe that got caught in that storm. It was Scott. They even found some boat parts still wedged underneath some water where that wreckage was originally found, and the Coast Guard did some tests of the registration numbers that John and his team had originally taken note of, and they found that it was, in fact, the Sarah Joe boat that went missing. Even upon more of searching through that excavation site of the grave, they found more skeletal bones. All of those bones belonged to Scott. Something buried him out there all alone. They still hadn't found the rest of the 4 men. As this crew dug up the entire skeleton of Scott, they even found some pieces of paper that were buried underneath with him. They were separated by pieces of foil as probably sort of preservative. They had no idea who or why those papers with notes were placed with Scott or who buried him to begin with. And none of the other men were ever really found, and it really just stayed an entire mystery. To this day, everyone wonders who wrote those notes or who even buried Scott and where the rest of the men ever even ended up. Who do you think might have buried him right down that deserted island?